Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you very much for joining today's Wellness Wednesday webinar on a very important topic on how to keep your bones healthy. My name is Katrina Francis, and I'm working within the ESS Nutrition and Wellbeing team. If you do have any questions throughout today's presentation that you want to know the answers to, just pop them into the Q&A box and I'll be happy to answer them at the end, or I'll respond with an email following. So the reason why we are looking at bone health is because this month on the 20th of October, it is World Osteoporosis Day. So today I'll be covering why bone health is important. And obviously one of the reasons is to try and lower our risk of osteoporosis. Be looking at dietary considerations for bone health, as well as looking at specific guidance for groups which may be at a higher risk of poor bone health. Also be looking at other daily lifestyle things which we need to consider for our bone health as well. So looking at alcohol and smoking, as well as the amount of physical activity that we're doing and what type of activity is best for bone health. So let's get straight to it by looking at why our bone health is important. So our bone health has many different functions and roles. So first of all, they provide us with structure. If we weren't to have any bones, then we would just be a pool of skin and organs. They protect specific organs. So for example, we have the skull, or a technical term for it, the cranium, which protects our brain. And then we've got our ribs, which protect our heart, and so on. They also help us to facilitate movement. So where two bones join, it obviously creates that joint where it allows us to bend our arms and legs and to perform any type of movement. Blood cells are made in the bone marrow. So this is the spongy tissue which is inside the bones. And also nutrients are stored in the bone. A particular one is calcium. So our bones are obviously extremely important. However, some people do experience poor bone health, and this leads to a number of health conditions. The first one is rickets. This is most common in children. It can lead to bone pain, poor growth, weak bones, and can also form deformities during their growth. There is an adult equivalent of this, and that is osteomalacia. And this is when our bones become soft, and it can lead to bowing of our bones during growth as well. And the most common bone problem is osteoporosis, and around 3 million people in the UK do have this condition, and most common within elderly and also women. And I'll go on to talk about why in just a moment. So let's look at a bit of background information around our bones to make us understand the importance and some of the processes our bones go through. So our bones are a living tissue, and therefore they are constantly changing. And this is known as bone remodeling. So old bone is being broken down and new bone is being formed constantly. And there's lots of different cells involved within this. And for this process to work, we require energy. And energy comes from the foods and the drinks that we consume, and therefore diet plays a really important role in our bones and bone health. Now, bone remodeling happens, and during childhood and adolescence, we see more bone being formed and deposited than bone which is broken down or withdrawn. This means that during that stage of our life, our skeleton and our bones are growing in size and in density. However, when we reach around the late 20s, we reach a peak bone mass, and this is the maximum amount of bone a person will have during their lives. So ideally, we want to make this as high as possible, as then we're obviously going to have more in the bank as such, and we're less likely to experience osteoporosis later in life. And when we reach around 30 years, naturally, our bone does begin to decline. You might be thinking, well, I might be over the age of 30, it's too late. That is not the case. If obviously you want to listen on, we'll discuss how you can try and maintain your bone mass and slow down that decline as well. So it's not just our age which determines our bone health. There are other factors as well. So like I said, the first one is age. The older we are, the more likely we are to have problems with our bones. Our diet, so the amount of calcium and vitamin D that we consume. Physical activity, so those who are physically inactive tend to have a higher risk of osteoporosis or fractures and falls. Tobacco and alcohol use, so research suggests that smoking can contribute to weakened bones, and one alcoholic drink a day for women or two alcoholic drinks if for men can increase our risk. Gender, so unfortunately women are at a greater risk, and that's due to our hormones, which I'll go on to talk about in a moment. Body size and weight. So if we are underweight or if we have a smaller body frame, we are more likely to have problems with our bones, as we're going to have less bone mass there to begin with to start withdrawing from. Ethnicity and family history. So individuals who come from a white or Asian descent are at a higher risk of bone problems, as well as obviously if you've got parents or siblings with it. Hormone levels, so thyroid, estrogen, testosterone, all of those, if they're not in the correct balance, can lead to poor bone health. Eating disorders and other conditions, so again, that links in with being underweight. If we are underweight, we are at an increased risk. And finally, certain medications as well can impact our bone health. So let's now look at the dietary considerations for bone health. So first of all, calcium. Calcium is vital for many bodily functions, and obviously one of them being our bone health and bone strength. And in fact, 99% of calcium in the body is found within the skeleton. So calcium is present alongside phosphate, which forms a crystallized complex, which is what makes the bone strong, and it creates that strong bone structure. And on average, an adult should be consuming 700 milligrams of calcium per day. If we don't, that's when we may start seeing signs of deficiency, which could be rickets in children and osteoporosis later in life. Now, in the UK, we get the majority of our calcium from our dairy or dairy alternative products. And as you can see, that's from milks, cheeses, yogurts. It's also in skimmed milks or low fat yogurts. We still find calcium present, as well as canned sardines or canned fish. And interestingly, particularly if they have soft edible bones in, as obviously it's the bones which store the calcium. So the more of those bones as well, we're contributing more to the calcium intake. You can probably see here that there's nothing specific for vegan diets, and I will come on to discuss some alternatives for those who perhaps have a lactose intolerant and they don't necessarily consume these foods, or they're following a vegan diet. Next, we have vitamin D, which is also vital for bone health. If we do not have vitamin D, then calcium cannot actually be absorbed into the bones very effectively. So we need to have vitamin D and calcium going hand in hand within our diet so that we can see the benefits from both. And on average, an individual needs 10 micrograms of vitamin D per day. Now, we can get this from some of the foods within our diet, such as oily fish, egg yolks, mushrooms, and fortified products. So this means vitamin D has been added to them. Common ones include spreads and breakfast cereals. However, it tends to be a very small amount of vitamin D compared to what we need. So the majority of our vitamin D actually comes from the sun. So you may have heard it being known as the sunshine vitamin. So that's where the majority of it comes from. And as you can probably agree, we're not the luckiest. We don't tend to get that much sun, especially throughout winter, but actually also throughout summer at the moment. So it is recommended that everybody, every individual, consumes a supplement of vitamin D each day. So it is a recommendation for individuals to consume 10 micrograms of vitamin D a day in supplement form. And there are certain groups who should actually be considering supplementing throughout the whole year. Those include people who have darker skin, so it may be African Caribbean, or people of a South Asian origin. Individuals who are perhaps older, so over the age of 65, or individuals who don't actually go out very often, or when they do go out, then they're obviously covering up quite a lot of their skin. So if you fall into one of those groups, it is recommended to have vitamin D supplements throughout the year. Otherwise, it's recommended to have it from October to March. So really everybody should be thinking about, now, can I go out and get myself some vitamin D supplements just to add in within your diet, to make sure you're promoting good bone health. Just on the topic of obviously being out in the sun, we still want to promote being safe in the sun as well. It doesn't need us to be laying out in the sun for hours on end without sun cream. It is just as easy as getting your forearms out or your shins out on your daily walk, and obviously absorbing some of the vitamin D from there. Next up, protein is an extremely important nutrient, which supports bone health, but also our muscle health. It is recommended alongside the Eat Well guide that we get a range of different protein sources within our diet, so beans, pulses, eggs, fish, and meat. And just in general, in terms of protein, as well as dairy and dairy alternatives, if we're obviously consuming and following the Eat Well guide in the same portions, we will get all the vital vitamins, minerals, nutrients, and energy our bones need to stay healthy. So as always, we sort of revert back to the Eat Well guide, but it is a really powerful and useful tool, not only for bone health, but other parts of our health as well. So next up, let's look at specific populations that may actually be at a greater risk of osteoporosis. So the first one is vegan. So as I had detailed and highlighted on the previous slide, the majority of the calcium we consume within our diet is from dairy products, which obviously does not form part of a vegan diet. But there are alternatives to get our calcium from. So we've got sesame seeds, curly kale, dried figs, brown bread, all contain a source, all have calcium within them. And we can also see that those dairy alternatives, such as soya milks and also yogurts, have calcium in, but it is always recommended to go for fortified options. And as you can see, there's that comparison. A fortified option has 70 milligrams more of calcium than the non-fortified option. So do just look out for those if you're going for the alternate options to dairy. Also, vegan diets tend to have very little or if any vitamin D within them, other than again those fortified products, most commonly the spreads, breakfast cereals, and plant-based drinks. So try and opt for them as much as possible. And again, you've got that recommendation to get sunlight between the months of March and October, and then October to March, we should be supplementing on vitamin D. The next group, which are at particular risk from developing weaker bones, osteoporosis, and obviously increasing our risk of fractures and falls, are women following the menopause. So around 10 years following this transition, we will see a rather rapid decline in bone mineral density. And we can see that on that graph that we see a lot steeper decline in women than we do in men. And this is because our estrogen levels fall and eventually they completely stop. And estrogen actually has a protective effect on bone health. So therefore, when we lose this completely, we are at an increased risk of breaks, fractures, and osteoporosis. So the dietary considerations for women transitioning through the menopause is to consume a healthy, balanced diet, such like the Eat Well guide, to make sure you're getting enough dairy in to provide us with calcium. We're getting that summer sunlight, and again, you may want to consider vitamin D supplements throughout the year, just to try and slow down that rate of loss. And then also another group at risk of poor bone health, as mentioned earlier, is those who are a little bit elderly or older, um, as age is a contributing factor to bone density loss. So over 65s are at an increased risk. The reason, or the main reason as to why this is because actually as we get older, we do tend to see a decline in our appetite. And obviously where perhaps we may be eating a little bit less, we find it a little bit more challenging or difficult to obtain all of those vital vitamins, minerals, and nutrients we need to keep our bones and our muscles healthy. So if you are reducing the amount you're eating because obviously you're not got the same appetite, do still try and follow that Eat Well guide to obtain all of the nutrients that we need. Don't cut out calcium, don't cut out vitamin D, make sure you're still getting them. You obviously may still want to consider supplements. And another thing, try and maintain a healthy weight. So we may experience a weight loss to begin with as we get older and our appetite does begin to decrease, but try and maintain that healthy weight as being underweight is linked to higher risk of fractures. Now, inevitably, as we become older, we are going to become more frail and fragile. You may start noticing this within yourself or perhaps family members. So there are a few other things that you can do to try and prevent falls as well, and those are just highlighted here. So go for an eye test, get your hearing checked, look after your feet. This is because it can all affect our balance and our mobility. Review your medications with your GP. Some are linked to becoming more dizzy, and that obviously can put us off balance and lead to falls and fractures. And just making sure that homes are safe. So you've got a handrail or relative, make sure that they've got handrails so that they can support themselves as well. So let's look a little bit more now about our lifestyle for healthy bones. So it's not just about our diet. So first of all, staying active. So there is a common myth that doing exercise may be detrimental to our bone health, but this is not the case. We need to give our bones work to do to enable them to stay strong. It's the same with our muscles. Obviously, if we don't use our muscles, they begin to decline. You could argue the same about your mind. If you start switching off and you don't use your minds anymore, then we likely obviously see a decline in that as well. So keeping your activity levels up will help to maintain your bone density and strength as you age. Now, it is important to try and adopt a holistic approach to staying active. So what we mean by this is combining weight-bearing exercise, and this is when we are supporting or withstanding weight. So there's an actual stress or demand placed on our bones, such as weight, to make them go into that process of bone remodeling so that we're breaking old bone down and rebuilding new bone. And also we want to match that with strength exercises as well. So the guidance is to perform 150 minutes of moderate intensity activity a week. That can include those weight bearing exercises, so walking, dancing, playing tennis, pushing the lawnmower or skipping rope. Also try and do at least 2 strength activities a week. Bone health and muscle health do go hand in hand with each other. Obviously, they help to support each other. So we want to keep our muscle strength up as well. And also try and incorporate some balance and flexibility. And obviously that's just to try and maintain independence, ensuring that we're not stumbling over things. We're maintaining that balance as we get older as well. On this note, it's also important to mention that although cycling and swimming are great for cardiovascular health, these types of activities are not actually beneficial, or it's not detrimental, but it won't put that pressure on our bones. It won't work our bones in the way that some of those other exercises will. So great if you're doing these sort of activities, but also try and incorporate some of those weight bearing exercises as well to put our bones under that strain and under that pressure. And finally, just a few more things to consider. So first of all, alcohol. So studies suggest that heavy alcohol consumption compromises bone health and increases our risk of osteoporosis. So remember to stick to the guidelines of consuming no more than 14 units over a minimum of 3 days within a week. Smoking has been seen to reduce the blood supply to bones, which slows down the process of bone remodeling and decreases the ability to actually absorb that calcium into our bones, where it's obviously going to create that strong structure for us. So, along with any sort of health conditions, it's always best to try and stop smoking if you can. And finally, try and maintain a healthy weight. So actually being either underweight or overweight can increase your risk of osteoporosis and broken bones and fractures and so on. So just try and stay between that healthy BMI range of 18.5 and 24.9, and you can find out your BMI using calculators online. So just in summary now, how can you safeguard your bones? So try and do daily weight bearing exercise. This could be walking or running, or it can simply just be shifting your weight between one leg and another while you're standing for a bus. Also practicing that with balance if you're shifting your weight from one to another. Consume enough calcium, vitamin D and protein, and consider supplementing 10 micrograms of vitamin D from now until March within your daily routines. Follow the Eat Well guide to make sure you're getting all of the other vitamins, minerals and nutrients our body needs. Maintain a healthy weight and also avoid alcohol and stop smoking. So that is a quick overview and summary of how to keep our bones in good shape. So that brings me to the end. So thank you very much for tuning in and listening. I've had a very good turnout today, and obviously it's really important. We're all wanting to look after our bone health as we are all getting older as well. So thank you very much. I can't see any questions yet in the Q&A box. So what I'll do is if you do have any questions, if you just drop us an email, we'll be happy to answer them for you. Thank you very much, everybody, and enjoy the rest of your day.